of silence that doesn't mean absence. It means worship. The first time I entered that abandoned chapel, grey wood, decayed benches, a broken stained glass like a poorly healed eyelid, I didn't hear emptiness. I heard prayer, not from the living, not the kind with a voice, a prayer of air, of dust, and of things that insist on staying when the city has already forgotten the way. I went out of the stubbornness of a director and the prudence of a caretaker. The old cemetery we tend to, located 2 miles north of the main avenue, still has, on top of the hill, a chapel that the city hall has grown tired of repairing. Missing tiles, peeling walls, a cracked bell that hasn't rung since the winter of 1997. "Close it for good," told me an administrator. "No one needs it." "No one needs it" is a phrase that irritates me. The dead need a place, and the living need that place to be in order, even if they never enter again. I went on a windy afternoon with a lantern of warm light and the habit that saves me: to arrive slowly, look first, touch last. The door gave way with the old sigh of things that accept. The nave revealed its skeleton. Benches lined up, some lying sideways like tired horses. A rough altar, covered by a cloth that so old seemed colorless. Only a memory of color. An oval window at the back, very high, through which the sky came in pieces, as if asking for permission. And over all that layer of dust that only religious buildings know how to cultivate, grains that barely shine, yet still force you to speak softly. I don't like the word haunting. It ruins the honest work that the night does. But when I took the first step onto the floorboard, I had the same feeling I get before a well-conducted vigil. The air organized itself around me. It didn't get heavy. It got attentive. There was a cadence there, not of a clock, not of a machine, of measured breaths. The wind doesn't push like that. Winds are undisciplined. That had the rhythm of people who endure. Someone, years ago, had left a rosary on the altar, not the dark wood ones we count with our eyes closed. A plastic rosary, the kind you find at a fair, the type that gives off a shy glow when there's enough light. It was broken in half, with a loose knot connecting 2 sets of beads. Attached to the crucifix was a yellowed saint card of Our Lady of Sorrows, its edges chewed. I thought reflexively as a director to keep it so it wouldn't turn to trash. The building responded to me with its language, a long creak of wood coming from the ceiling, as if clearing its throat to say, "Don't touch yet." That's when I heard it. Not a word, not music. A low murmur, uniform, without vowels, without consonants, the kind of noise voices make when the mouth is merely following along. At wakes, when prayer swallows the room, we feel it, a mass of sound that doesn't recite anything particular, and yet it still forces you to respect it. The difference was that I was alone there. I know the sounds of wind passing through stained glass. I know the echo of bees in hollow wood. I know the pigeons with their own liturgies. That was another language. "I am here," it said, not like an announcement, but like a request for permission. I walked over to the first full bench, the only one that still had a firm backrest. I sat. My posture dropped from my spine on its own, just like it does in a chapel that works. Shoulders slightly back, feet aligned, breath measuring itself, the lantern on my knee. My hand on the wood, just the palm, no nails. The prayer of air continued, as if it no longer needed people, just the gesture of staying. There was a metal plaque nailed to the side wall which I memorized at first glance. Chapel of St. Joseph, 1904, renovated in 1953, 1978, 1996, and then the gravestone of abandonment, closed in 2001. The word closed hit me in the chest like a curse. To close the house of those who no longer occupy the others is to anger the only neighborhood that welcomes you without charging rent. I am not romantic. I know about leaks, risk, cost, but I also know about promises. An abandoned chapel is a broken promise spoken aloud, and broken promises, as you know, generate murmurs. I decided I wouldn't dismantle anything that afternoon. I wouldn't take the rosary, wouldn't wash the cloth, wouldn't align the benches. I decided I would do what the house asked me to do, and I swear it asked, stay. Staying is the verb that saves my profession from becoming mere theater. And in that chapel, staying meant listening to that circular murmur 3 times, while the wind outside rehearsed another tune. There was no significant temperature change. There was no door slamming, no object moved. There was only the etiquette of a place asking for company without a story. When I got up, after what my body called half an hour and my watch called 12 minutes, I went up to the altar and just aligned the saint card, not out of care, out of respect for whoever had placed it there. The broken rosary stayed. The sad cloth stayed. I, less tense, stayed another minute on the step. And when I left, the door didn't creak. The door breathed. That was it. That chapel, abandoned, still breathed prayers. I just needed to understand whose. The old cemetery always keeps, in its reliefs, instructions that no one has written down. The finest gravel path marks where the cart used to pass to avoid graves during the rainy season. The line of cypress trees, which suddenly bends at an odd angle, marks the limit of a plot that was once disputed. The chapel up on the hill serves as an emotional compass. Those who ascend breathlessly have usually been called. Those who ascend just to climb rarely enter. The morning after my first visit, I returned with two things that don't weigh much: a field notebook and the kind of silence that restores your judgment. I knew from files and street corner conversations why the chapel had been closed. Silent infiltration, a piece of the ceiling that came down one windy night, termites hungry for miracles in the benches on the right, and 4 renovation requests denied for priority budget. The community migrated the right to the new chapel on the other side of the hill. Easy tiles, uniform benches that don't complain, air conditioning that doesn't think. The old one remained as a stubborn memory. No one prays there, they told me. It's dangerous. 6 old women raised their eyebrows like old women raise their eyebrows at grown boys. You don't know. I didn't know. I entered with sunlight filtering through the cracks. In daylight, the dust doesn't frighten, it teaches. Each grain a signature of time. There were handprints on the benches, the size of children's hands, in places where children couldn't reach without a prior bench. On the altar, 3 palms to the left of center, the cloth, which at night had no color, revealed a halo. People tend to place objects in the same spot for years. I didn't find candles, matches, clean cloths, or flowers. I found notes. 5, folded, dated. The oldest on school notebook paper, the newest torn envelope scraps. None were hidden. They lay under the rosary as if the crucifix was guarding them from curiosity. Did I read them? No. I work with what is given to me aloud. What is whispered belongs to those who whisper. The murmur didn't happen during the day. The building has modesty. In broad daylight, what it offered me was its anatomy. The central beam with the scar of old repairs, nails that had learned rust as a craft, the bell's base cracked in a pattern that the human mind turns into a map. I took measurements as if it were my job to measure the world. I pointed a lens at the broken stained glass to capture the outline of the sky in the oval. And once again, I didn't move. I was learning the difference between restoration and desecration. On days when the city feigns civility, what gets restored is what earns votes. On afternoons when no one is looking, desecration is stripping things of their ability to host silence. In the afternoon, by a polite insistence I call the building's calling, I returned. I didn't bring a lantern. I didn't want to force the dark to become light. I brought a battery-powered candle. Ugly, useful, and the best way to test if the house accepts sweetness. I placed the candle on the altar step, opposite the rosary, far from the notes. I lit it. The plastic mimicked flame with humility. I sat and waited for the invisible cuff of prayer to ask me for the gesture I was rehearsing not to do. Speak. The murmur came when the wind gave up on the hill in 3 waves, the first weak like someone assessing the intruder, the second fuller like when the choir finds the note, the third so regular that I could count without guilt the time between the peaks. It wasn't a prayer of text, it was a prayer of intention. People used to praying like this have the strength of those who have made bread, washed floors, and done the math at least 3 times before paying. Them, I thought, because the room smelled of stored cloth, the kind only women's hands know how to fold in the same place for decades. If they are, I said, I am. I responded with the only liturgy the house allows me, presence without words. And there, in this presence, I saw the message the chapel was keeping for me. The notes weren't papers, they were commitments. And commitments here were never about burying secrets. They were to remind the living of what still needs to be fixed. There was a crack in the floor on the right side, with marks of recent dragging. Not recent from days, recent from years. The wood, when walked on too much, spills dust in a pattern that a trained hand learns. There was a bench close to the altar, a few centimeters, just enough to accommodate a knee. There was a silly password written in pencil on the window frame. Tuesday. Who writes Tuesday in a closed chapel? Who doesn't know how to live without Tuesday? I wrote in my notebook a plan that doesn't depend on City Hall. Remove debris from the entrance to avoid tripping. Put up a no access sign where there's too much access. Clean only what humbles, not what teaches. Listen, no taking the rosary, no collecting the notes, no new paint, no photo in the newspaper. The chapels that still pray ask for less heroism than the people who want to examine miracles. When the last murmur settled and the fake candle fell silent, the cracked bell at the top did what cracked bells sometimes do when the heat eases. A light ting, timid, almost an insult from the metal. It was enough for my discipline to remember that to the sound of bells, even intermittent ones, the people here have always prayed. I left with the feeling of having received a charge without a note. Don't let the chapel become a set. A set is the death of prayer. And there, I swear, there were still those who prayed. Good work usually brings bad work along with it. Rumors. 2 weeks later, someone said I was calling people to pray with ghosts. Another person declared that I intended to reopen what God had closed. I breathed as I do when a family brings me their dead with the innocence of those who think I have power. 4 beats, pause, 4 beats. No. I didn't call anyone. I didn't reopen anything. I only stayed. And staying sometimes is the only verb that restores decency to an old building. Even so, I needed to act in a way that respected both my profession and the city, and that the city would respect my profession. With the administrator's permission, I installed a discreet chain at the chapel's entrance with a sincere sign. Closed. Structural risk. If you need to enter, call the director. People of good faith obey sincere signs. Those of bad faith prefer prohibitive ones. My sign discouraged spectacles and invited caution. On Saturdays, I would go up, move the chain aside, enter, sit and write. The dust, the light, the air, the presence. In the 3rd week, I found a real candle burned halfway, resting on the left side niche. There was no wax on the floor, there was respect. Someone, knowing the closure, had obeyed the rule of fire, what lights, extinguishes, or watches over. The candle still had the cheap smell of a neighborhood store. I raised my head to thank a lady who wasn't there. I found on the back bench a cloth bag with a new rosary, made of blue beads, alongside a folded recipe for cornbread. I could have taken it to keep in the administration. I didn't. I changed the location. I left the bag under the bench where the wood was still dignified, the rosary at the foot of the altar, the recipe inside the yellowed saint card. Whoever needed it would find it. Whoever didn't wouldn't see it. The tension in the chapel wasn't spectral. It was municipal. They talked about demolishing it for safety. I stopped everything I could with paperwork and visits. Simple report, honest photos, risk versus value account. I presented another sign. Temporary stabilization project. No funding. The no funding exposed has the power to make those who decide ashamed. Either they openly accept abandonment or they help. 3 offers for a volunteer task force arrived, which I graciously and critically declined. A chapel doesn't become a weekend project. Becoming a project is becoming an event, and the chapel couldn't handle becoming an event. One afternoon, I went with an apprentice. She has eyes that still want to see too much. I teach her to discipline the eye with 2 things, pencil and pause. I showed her the halo on the altar cloth, the handprints, the drag trail, the word Tuesday on the window frame. She asked as if she didn't know yet that the question offends. What if no one is praying? What if it's just the wind? I answered with the only sentence that doesn't lie and doesn't romanticize. Then the wind learned Latin. She smiled, embarrassed. I added, here our job is not to prove, it is not to spoil. The week after the rumors, it rained slowly. The leak in the central beam began a song that I, trying to avoid sentimentality, called the metronome of a litany. It was impossible not to notice the obedient rhythm. I sat on the bench that already knew the weight of my body and let the rain pray. For 5 minutes, the chapel demanded the right not to be necessary. Then, the water gave way, the dust settled, and the murmur returned without water on top. It occurred to me that the voices I was hearing were the same as before, copied by the wood's memory. Or something else. Or none of that. I promised myself the same commitment I had made on the other nights, not to complete. On a Thursday morning, not Tuesday, I found a new note under the plastic rosary. It was dated. No name. Thank you for still existing. It was the first time in months that I touched a piece of paper. Not to read it, but to place it back in the same spot, with the care of a librarian. I carefully slid it back under the crucifix and said the only Amen I recognize outside of a missal. Yes. The tension also came from those who wanted a miracle. A video producer asked to record the phenomenon. I responded with the austere discipline that saves me from hating myself afterward. Here, only those who have already cried may record. It's a stupid rule, I know. It serves to prevent the chapel from becoming a set. She didn't cry. She didn't record. The cracked bell insisted on biting the heat in a way that produced notes, sometimes false, sometimes perfect. One day 3 tings in a row, another none. I recorded the rainfall as if I were a scientist. I recorded the wind as if I were a poet. I didn't give interviews. The city, tired, gave me the rarest gift. It left the building undisturbed, and it responded in kind, smelling of dry cloth, offering shade in the exact size of 2 people, and returning murmurs that didn't stay in the ear. They stayed on the shoulder, where we carry old weight. The turning point didn't come with sound. It came with a request. On a Tuesday, and here I allow myself the right to the coincidence, 2 women slowly ascended the hill. One carried a walker, moving with the rhythm of someone who had witnessed more births than burials. The other, a spiral notebook with a floral cover. Director? They call me that when they want my paper authority and my obedience as a person. Can we have 5 minutes? I looked at the chain. I looked at the sincere sign. I looked at the wind. 5. I opened it. They entered as if they already had a map. The older woman touched the doorframe as if performing a ritual. The younger one, who shouldn't have been younger, children age us at the edges, opened the notebook. Let me read, she said, and the verb read made the air learn another grammar. I sat on the usual bench sideways, like a caretaker who keeps distance and human warmth. And I listened for the first time in that chapel to a voice of light, not echo. You who stayed here when we left, thank you. Pause. You who held the wind when the bell cracked, thank you. Pause. You who endured our hidden note, forgive us. The old woman with the walker murmured what only old women murmur, sounds of yes and uh-huh that keep the phrases in place. The other continued. Today I came to return what my mother asked never to tell, but the city forgot, and I can't take it with me. She took from the notebook an envelope older than the envelope from the cookie tin in historical houses. There was no money. There was no property paper. There was a list of women's names with what each one did. Washed clothes, cooked for the vigil, braided children's hair, prayed for those who didn't know how to pray. No dates, no values, no debts, only duties. And at the end of the list, a thank you signed with 4 initials. She placed the list under the rosary. Now they can pray without remembering what we forgot. I breathed with the stubbornness of someone walking on a rooftop edge, slow, disciplined, praying that my body wouldn't betray the ritual by saying, "How beautiful." You don't say "how beautiful" when the world returns to its place. The beauty of return lies in not needing an adjective. The old woman then, without my permission and without my need, began to pray. Not in Latin, at home. Thank you for the bread. Sorry for the hurry. Hold the names when we lose them. And the chapel, without asking, returned a cracked bell's ting so exact that I, for the first time, wished I were the only one to hear it, so it wouldn't make too much sense. "Director," called the one with the notebook, "do you leave the note?" I, who feel strong saying no to the world, said yes to the Tuesday women. "I'll leave it." She nodded. The old woman, with a gesture of rummaging through a market bag, pulled a ball of thread from her pocket. "It's not to fix the bench, it's to tie the rosary. We learned to tie it at home." I smiled without showing my teeth. The nights taught me that teeth shine too much in a ritual. I took the thread, cut a piece, and gave it to her. She, with the skill that the elderly pretend not to have, made 2 small knots at the spot where the rosary always gave way. "Now it will hold until next Tuesday." They left with their feet on the ground and their hands in the air. I stayed a little longer out of duty and habit. There was no murmur. There was nothing the camera would seek. There was a list under a rosary tied with thread from another house. There was a bench that bore another weight without creaking in distress. There was outside the wind shaking the leaves without speaking to the stained glass. In other words, there was peace, the costly peace, the one someone paid with a climb thread envelope and the courage to say. Climax in this work is never applause, it's agreement. Agreement came the following Saturday, when a family, unaware of any chapel, asked to go up the hill just to see the city from above. The youngest child ran ahead, stopped in front of the chain, read the sincere sign, and looked at me with a question that doesn't ask for words. "Can I?" The mother, without drama, held his arm and said, "Not today," and completed with the phrase that wraps things up well, "We'll come back when we can." The echo of that phrase in my chest silently connected the Tuesdays to mothers who know how to say, "Not today," with an implicit promise. Coming back when you can is the prayer that the chapel accepts. In the week of heat, the cracked bell decided to fall silent. The wood didn't cough. The dust didn't dance. The battery-powered candle, which I didn't even light, stayed on the step, merely the mute companion of the hill theology. There are weeks when nothing asks, and for that reason, everything stays. I signed the notebook with a short line, "Nothing." And nothing on that Saturday was a miracle of maintenance. I descended with the mature feeling that my work had improved without anyone noticing. Then it rained. The entire city, tired of heating up, offered the chapel the gift of October, a rain that cleans roofs without knocking down wiring. I went up with a raincoat and the shame of a raincoat. There are clothes that make too much noise in places that prefer whispers. I entered, breathed, saw the halo on the cloth grow by a millimeter, and felt for the first time the childish desire to bring 2 men and a cement mixer. "Fix the wall," my mind said. "Fix the silence," the building answered. I didn't bring the cement mixer. I brought a brush and a bucket of water to remove the mud from the entrance. The floor became decent. The chapel stayed a chapel. When I sat down, the rain invented a mantra of the leak. The murmur didn't come. A desire to murmur it on my own came. I don't pray by profession. I pray by posture. I did what I do when no word fits. I placed my open hand on the bench, as if giving the wood a piece of living skin and asking it to remember. If the building could speak, it would have said my full name in the right way, the way we only hear from those who warm our milk when we were bones and hunger. I answered with my yes. In this climax, without fanfare, the idea descended that my father would call a rule. The chapel didn't need to be renovated to pray again. It needed to be protected from those who want it as a stage and from those who want it as a ruin. Between the stage and the ruin, there's a narrow road for the profession. Stabilize enough so the silence doesn't collapse. Don't stabilize so much that you expel the silence. I demanded this from myself, not to turn the chapel into a conquest. Conquest is a thing of war. There the verb was care. On Sunday, the 2 Tuesday women left without entering. A package, thread, a large needle, a folded cloth, a note, just one. For when you're not here. I understood the message without offense. They didn't want to depend on a man in a tie to tie the world. I returned the bag to its place under the bench. I, who by profession distribute controls, accepted losing one more, the Tuesdays without me. A day later, the City Hall called me. With the aggressively sweet tone of decisions that come with money, we approved the demolition. "Denied," I replied, without the formality I used to employ. Structural risk, they insisted. Spiritual risk, I replied, knowing I would lose the cross-examination in the court of reason but would gain time. I requested a hearing, brought photos, brought the report, brought the incident log, without names. I also brought, and here my profession learns from theology, 2 wooden chairs from the new chapel. I placed them in the room. I asked them to sit. The wood adjusted their backs. "It's uncomfortable," they said. "Yes," I said, "and that's why we stay less time." They laughed. They signed suspended. I thanked them with the silence of those who know they will still fight. The end is not the moral of the story. The end, here, is a responsibility that doesn't close. The abandoned chapel where the dead still pray, if I may keep the phrase that someone will mock, remains closed. It continues breathing. It continues accepting Tuesdays. The cracked bell still bites the heat when it pleases and gives a ting as a gift to those who don't film. The plastic rosary tied with thread from another kitchen still holds notes that do not belong to me. The sincere sign still says, "Call the director," and I continue responding, 5 minutes. I don't know if it is the dead who pray there, or the living who have learned to pray without an audience and therefore seem dead to the hurried ones. I know that prayer doesn't need the world to work. It needs someone to maintain the minimum conditions for it to happen. A door that opens without knocking down part of the ceiling, a bench that accepts 2 humble backs, a cloth that does not humiliate the bread that imagination offers. And above all, it needs a city that understands that not everything that is abandoned is empty. If one day you climb a hill to see an old chapel, don't take a camera. Take time. If you find a chain, read the sign. If it says, "Call the director," call. If he opens, enter with the posture your body learned in the empty kitchen of your grandmother's house. Speak softly, move little, give thanks before asking. If you hear a murmur, don't translate it. If you hear water, don't wish for music. If you hear nothing, accept. Sometimes silence is just that, the world returning the favor of not needing you. I continue fighting with papers to stabilize the minimum, not to turn the chapel into an Instagrammable monument, but so that it can endure the breath of the Tuesday women. If one day they tear it down, and they might, I will preserve less the wood and more the rule. Don't turn into an event what is sustained by small gestures. I will build in myself a new bench with the measure of those backs, and I will sit on it, in any room, to listen when no one asks me to. And if I have the courage, I will hear what I hear there. Thank you for still existing. Now it's your turn. If you were standing in front of a closed chapel at the top of a cemetery and someone asked you for 5 minutes, would you open it? Would you care for the place so it wouldn't become ruin or stage? Or would you prefer the clean safety of close it for good? Comment the keyword, Tuesday, and tell me, what, for you, still prays, even when the city thinks it's over?